Today on Comicstorian, Batman takes Venom, the strength-enhancing drug. This is Comicstorian. We take some of your favorite storylines, break them down into a synopsis, cutting out all the extra fluff and B-plots, and only tell you the core thing that is important. The idea is so that you can understand what's going on in the world of comic books and add these to your collection, or just get caught up so you can go buy the next issue. All alterations are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by its respective companies. Today we're going to be bringing you a classic storyline known as Batman Venom. Before the creation of the supervillain Bane, Batman is the one who tested out the Venom drug and discovered where it comes from. This is that story right here on our full story series. The storm lashes on them as Batman steps out of the shadows, but the city worker tries to wave him away from the tunnel, explaining to him that the tunnel is flooding and about to come down. "A child's down there," Batman growls at him, but the worker stammers, averting his eyes from Batman's gaze. But Batman merely pushes past him, heading into the subterranean depths, a lantern in his hands. He pushes forward, his boots splashing in the gathering water, and eventually he hears the faintest whimper of a human voice. But the ceiling begins to cave in as he pushes forward, large boulders blocking his path. And after the rumbling stops, Batman steps closer to the cave-in. "Sissy Porter," he calls out, and the young girl calls back to him as the water begins to rise around her. "I'll have you out in a minute," Batman yells to her, beginning to pick up the large rocks and throw them away. He struggles as the rocks get bigger and bigger until only one remains, and he pushes his back into it, trying desperately to lift it out of the way as the water reaches Sissy's neck. He shifts his grip, trying to lift the rock from another angle, and Sissy tilts her head back, trying to breathe in as much air as she can. Batman panics, diving underwater, trying to get underneath the large stone, but it's slick and his gloves slide away, and he finally raises up out of the water, calling out to the girl. But his lantern illuminates her lifeless eyes that stare back at him from beneath the waters. It's later that Alfred looks up as Batman steps through the door to Wayne Manor, waving away his butler, sitting on the couch as he explains that he thought that he was so smart to have tracked the kidnapper's location, to learn where they had been keeping the girl. "But I wasn't strong enough," he says quietly, pulling his cowl off, cradling his head, telling Alfred, "I failed." "Did you expect that you never would?" Alfred asks gently, and the faithful servant suggests that Bruce clean himself up and retire for the night. But Bruce refuses, pulling back on his cowl and explaining that he has to tell Sissy's father. At 4 a.m, Batman finds himself outside of Randolph Porter's home. He slips inside and finds the men working at his lab. "I can't say how sorry I am," Batman tells him softly. But Porter doesn't seem all that upset. "Well, it's a shame. My daughter certainly had a short life, but I dare say that it was a happy one," he says with a slight smile. They talk for a brief moment before Batman brings up the kidnappers. "You said they didn't want any money. What were they after?" he asks, and Porter holds up a handful of pills, explaining that he works in designer drugs that are designed to make people stronger. "If you had them in the tunnel tonight, Sissy would be alive." Batman holds up one of the pills as Porter offers it to him, but he turns, tossing it away. "Not interested," he says, but he stops short, listening. "Is there anyone else in the house?" he asks quickly, and Porter tells him no, so Batman pulls him into the next room, warning him that someone is coming up the stairs. He whirls around as the shutter of the suppressed submachine gun sounds in the hallway, rounds chewing through the door. The thug rushes in, but Batman moves fast, ripping the weapon out of his grasp, and he lashes out, punching the goon hard enough to knock him away. Porter bursts into the room as Batman moves towards the window. "One of the kidnappers, call the cops. I'm going after his partner," he snaps, leaping through the window into a shower of broken glass. He jumps off the balcony into the getaway truck as it begins to rumble, but he lands wrong, his breath being forced out of his body. His fingers try to grip the sides, but they have no purchase, and they begin to slip in the rain. The driver knows that he's there and begins to swerve wildly, side-swiping a tree, the force of the collision knocking Batman away, and he falls into the mud. Later, as he returns home, still dripping wet from the battle, he ignores Alfred's jokes of being covered in mud. He heads into the cave beneath the manor. Alfred follows him, knowing that his young charge is torturing himself, and he finds Bruce in the cave, trying desperately to lift weights that weigh the same as the boulder that stopped him the night before, the ones that killed the girl. He suddenly cries out in pain, grabbing his shoulder, and Alfred leads him to the table where he examines the shoulder that is already starting to swell. Your deltoid muscle is beginning to swell. Torn, probably, he says, suggesting that Batman seek medical aid, but Bruce refuses, pulling on his civilian clothes and walking upstairs. Get the car, he orders, and they head back out, finding the tree that the truck hit. Bruce pulls paint chips from the trees and begins to track the attackers, following the paint chips to the local body shops, bribing an owner to let him see the records. And it all leads to one man. They stop outside that small apartment with Alfred still begging Bruce to rest, since he hasn't slept in 96 hours. But Bruce shakes his head as he pulls out his costume. I can get the scum who killed her. Can't rest until I do, he says, slipping up the fire escape, standing outside the window, overhearing the two goons talk about the attack. You're going to the police headquarters, both of you, he growls as he slips through the window, but the bigger goon stands up, readying for a fight. I can take him, he growls, rushing forward, taking a swing that Batman ducks, but he follows up with another attack that Batman blocks quickly. He cries out in pain as his wounded shoulder flares up, but he ducks under another attack, uppercutting the goon in the ribs. The other has recovered from his fear, and he swings a lamp at Batman, cracking him in the shoulder. Batman lays stunned, unable to avoid another blow from the big goon, and he hits the ground hard as the goon smiles, picking him back up. See? I told you he wasn't so tough, he sneers, holding Batman, allowing his friend to punch him a few times. Finally, the big goon holds Batman by the throat, whirling around so that he's in front of the window, punching him hard. Batman knows that he can't stop the blow, taking it, using the force to thrust himself out the window so that he falls down into the street, near where Alfred is waiting with the car. The goons laugh, talking about going down there to finish off Batman, but a voice calls out to them from the door to the apartment. No, let him go. His time is yet to come, he says to them, and Bruce finally wakes up the next day, sitting up in a bed with shock. Alfred standing nearby, telling Bruce that he had a doctor look in on him. I told him that you fell out of a hot air balloon onto a table of cheese blintzes, he says with a smile. Bruce thanks him, struggling out of bed, despite Alfred's warnings. Don't worry, I'm not blundering into trouble again. At least not tonight, Bruce tells him as he pulls on his costume. It's shortly after that he finds himself once more in the lab of Randolph Porter. Those pills that you mention, Bruce says quietly, and Porter smiles, handing Bruce one of the pills, promising that it will make going to the gym a thing of the past. He smiles as Bruce hesitates for a moment before swallowing one, and with that down, he hands him a bag. A month's supply. When these run out, let me know. Batman stalks onward that night, finding the bar where the two goons are hanging out. He finds the scared one at the bar, putting his hand on his shoulder. You weren't hard to find, he growls as he lifts the man up, throwing him across the room. He whirls on the big one. Your turn, he hisses, and the big goon smiles, throwing a punch, but Batman easily catches it, fear passing through the big goon's eyes as Batman lashes out at him, punching him hard enough to throw him across the room and out the bar's window. A moment passes as Batman feels something in the base of his spine, and it begins to travel upward to his mouth. He throws back his head, beginning to laugh maniacally. 3 months have now passed, with a shadowy man kicking in a door. He stands ready as two of the goons rush him, but he grabs them by the throat, lifting them up and throwing them onto another group of goons on the table. He grabs a furnace, ripping it out of the floor, lifting it over his head, smiling down on the goons that cower in fear. You know what I'm doing, punk? I'm trying to decide just which of your holes to cram this into. He sneers and he drops the furnace, lifting the goon up, slamming him into the wall, wailing on him several times. He drops him, listening to him gasp as he pulls himself across the floor. And once he steps back outside, the cool rain now falls on his face and he laughs. He enjoys it. What, may I ask, was the point of this exercise? Alfred asks as Bruce finishes telling him the story of his night's escapades. Scare them, Alfred. Make them afraid to show their faces, he says as he takes off his hat and coat. He reaches down, picking up the 690-pound dumbbell, easily lifting it over his head. Alfred stands nearby, questioning why Bruce is bothering to work out anymore, and why he doesn't go out as Batman. Damn if I know. It just doesn't feel comfortable anymore, Bruce says as he reaches down for the free weights and begins to knock out bicep curls. That is the answer. Another might be that it represents something that is shamed by your present behavior. Alfred notes, but Bruce snaps at Alfred, ordering him to mind his own business, and the butler sniffs heading up the stairs. "Where are you going?" "Away from you," Alfred calls over his shoulder, and anger fills Bruce as he finishes his workout. He walks over to his batsuits, promising to show Alfred the truth as he pulls them on. In a short amount of time, he's in Porter's lab, with the scientist smiling back at him. "Good to see you again," he says. "Right. Nice to see you. You have them?" Batman asks, his eyes searching for pills, and Porter nods, but instead waves over a U.S. Army general standing in the office. "This is General Timothy Slaycroft. The general would like to make you an offer," Porter says, and Batman and the general shake hands as Claycroft says that he is a consultant on the private project about national security and would like to work with Batman. "I'll think about it," Batman says, before turning back to Porter asking for his pills. Porter smiles, handing him a small bag, and Batman looks at it for a moment. "There are only 4, he says quietly, and Porter nods, studying Batman closely as he explains that he didn't have much time this week and that Batman should stop in and get some later. "Is that a problem?" he asks, still studying Batman. There's a moment of hesitation before Batman answers. "No, of course not," he says, and he turns to leave, but stops at the door and tells Porter that he has found the 2 thugs that have kidnapped his daughter. "Not a good idea. Surely there are other criminals you can harass," Porter notes, but Batman turns, walking out the door, and Porter smiles, looking at the general. "I'm pleased. Notice how dull he seemed? How anxious he was to get the pills? Another week and he's ours," Porter tells his friend, but the smile drops as he explains to the general that they have another problem, that Batman might find out that the 2 goons were actually working for them. "I'll take care of it," the general says, reaching for the phone. Outside, Batman moves quickly, realizing that someone is lurking in the shadows. He grabs the large man, throwing him to the ground, demanding to know who he is, but the young man screams in pain, explaining that he is the general's son. Batman hesitates before letting the young man up. "I can see the resemblance around your eyes. Word of advice, don't lurk around the darkness, stand in the light," Batman tells the man, and he smiles at Batman and agrees, allowing the dark night to slip away. He moves through the city quickly, finding the rundown apartments the 2 goons are staying at. But as he moves through the building, he hears the sound of gunshots echoing from upstairs. He doesn't hesitate, kicking in the door, but he's too late and only finds the goons on the floor, laying in pools of their own blood. He moves towards the open window, hearing the sound of running feet in the alleyway below, and he looks down to see the 2 shooters moving towards their car. Batman turns back to the apartment, knowing that he can't move quickly enough to stop them. But he grabs the fridge, wrenching it out of the wall easily. He whirls around, his costume ripping as his muscles bulge. He lifts the fridge over his head, throwing it through the wall, and it sails through the air, landing on the car, making sure that it's going nowhere. In mere moments, he's back on the street, rushing through the smoke and the broken glass, not thinking as he rips the car door off its hinges, pulling the man free. "You did the dirtbags upstairs, and you're gonna tell me why. But not right away." Batman snarls as he pulls the thugs in close, a look of crazed enjoyment on his face as he throws the man away. He stalks down the alleyway, his mouth twisted in a crazed sneer. "First, I'm gonna hurt you a while." He laughs, reaching for the goon, but a voice calls out to him from behind. "Mister, watch out!" it screams, and Batman turns to see the second gunman struggling out of the wreck, his gun shakily aiming at Batman. The gunfire erupts, the man that Batman clutches spasms as the rounds hit his body. The gunman in the car is also hit as a spray of bullets fill him with lead. Batman turns to watch as a car speeds away, but his reaction is slow, and the car is gone before he even starts moving. Sirens sound in the distance, and Batman decides to leave, not wanting to answer the cops' questions. That night, at Porter's house, the general and the scientist are talking, discussing how it was necessary for the 2 goons to die. But the police might discover that the gunman served under the general in Vietnam. "My contacts downtown tell me the general won't quit and can't be bought. He'll trace their movements, and then one day, he'll arrive with warrants," the general notes, but Porter waves him away, believing that now they have Batman in their clutches and they can use him to their advantage. So the next night, Bruce calls to Alfred as he wakes up. "Where is he?" he growls, getting up, moving through the manor, finding himself in the cave, where Alfred has left a note. "Quit." Bruce reads it numbly, looking up at the ceiling where the bats dangle far ahead, momentarily sad that he has no one to talk to anymore. He heads over to his weights, putting on more weight and preparing to deadlift it. but he gasps and he struggles, unable to lift the heavy object. Can't lift it. Can't lift it. He gasps, reaching for his jacket where he keeps the pills from Porter. Only a lousy $6.90 and I can't even lift it. He hisses to himself, and as he pulls out the pill baggie, he discovers that it's empty, and anger fills him as he throws the jacket to the floor. Of all the lousy! Porter, his fault. Should have given me more like I asked. He thinks he can get away with it. He's got another thing coming, Bruce yells in the emptiness of the cave. And in a short time, he has returned to Porter's house, his anger overwhelming him as he kicks in the door. Give them to me, he snaps, pointing at Porter and ignoring the general. Are you prepared to earn them? The general asks, and Batman whirls as if noticing the general for the first time. What do you mean earn them? He asks, and the general explains that the pills are being developed so that he can put together a group of super soldiers that will be trained to clean up the streets of America, to get rid of the less desirables. But we've run into a problem, the general says as he holds out a photo, and Batman takes it, staring down at the picture of Jim Gordon. Kill him, the general says simply, and Porter continues to study Batman, looking for a reaction. Understand? He asks. Batman looks at the photo for a moment before looking up at them. No sweat. Batman turns away from Dr. Porter and the general, promising that he'll bring them Gordon's head with an apple stuck in his mouth. The general shakes his head. The apple won't be necessary. A simple execution will suffice, he tells Batman. But Porter smiles, commenting that the apple might be a nice touch. Now, can I have what I came for? Batman asks, holding out his hand for his pills. But Porter promises that once he returns from killing Gordon, he'll have Batman's pills. Batman simply nods, and he heads towards the door. I'll be back. A short while later, Batman is hiding in the shadows of a tree, watching as Gordon walks his dog down a lonely Gotham street. He leaps out of the shadows as Gordon is passing. I've come to kill you, he snarls as he lands, and a startled Gordon reaches for his gun, but Batman holds up his hand. I mean, I've been sent to kill you, and when I don't, they'll send somebody else, he says. He quickly fills Gordon in on the two men that sent him. His voice is shaky though, withdrawal beginning to set in. Gordon reaches out a hand, putting it on his shoulder. Are you all right? No, Batman says quietly, but the anger suddenly fills him and he grabs Gordon's jacket, gritting his teeth. I'm going after them now. Maybe I'll get them. If not, you hit them in the morning. Back at Porter's house, General Slaycroft gets off the phone, informing his colleague that Gordon has learned that the gunmen serve underneath him. By now, Gordon has informed others. It's only a matter of time until they connect us, he tells Porter, and he nods. We better hurry. The plane leaves in an hour, he says, but a voice growls out of the shadows as the three men are heading to their car. You aren't going anywhere, Batman hisses, leaping down, blocking their path, the general moving in to attack them, but Batman easily shoves them aside, and as his young son moves to help him, Batman rushes forward, grabbing Dr. Porter, lifting him up, and throwing him over the car. You're going downtown, he snaps as he reaches for the doctor, but Porter pulls a bag of pills out of his pocket. Do you recognize these? Do you want them? He says, throwing the bag of drugs into the nearby bushes. Batman hesitates for a moment before dropping the doctor and rushing after them. The car screeches away behind him as he's searching. Got them, he says with glee as he lifts the bag out of the dirt and begins to laugh maniacally. He suddenly stops as a moment of clarity shows him what he has become. And he stands, spilling the pills out on the ground, crumpling the bag. He finally knows what he must do. He puts in a call into Alfred, begging his old friend to help him. Meet me at the mansion in a half an hour. Please, he says quietly after he tells Alfred his plan. He's still angry when Alfred meets him, and Bruce stands before the grandfather clock, ordering Alfred not to let him out of the cave for a month, promising that he has enough food and water. What about the other exits, sir? Alfred asks as Bruce walks into the darkness. I've blocked them all, he says over his shoulder. Alfred tries to argue again, but Bruce turns, glaring at him, and finally Alfred relents, sealing the door. The plane is flying away from Gotham, with Slaycroft's son asking where they're going. What does it matter to you? Slaycroft asks with a sneer, no love for his son in his voice. I'd just like to know, Timothy asks, and Slaycroft sighs, explaining to his son that they are heading to the island of Santa Prisca, where they can continue Porter's research quietly. Then we shall return to Gotham and continue our business there. Time continues to pass on the island as Porter and Slaycroft continue their work in the large mansion that they purchased. Timothy spends his time exploring outside where he meets a beautiful local girl. Meanwhile, 10 days have passed since Bruce was locked away in the cave. Alfred stands by the intercom, listening to the sounds of darkness below, the grunts, the sounds of distress and of pain, and he briefly thinks about saying words of encouragement to his young charge, but quickly steps away from the speaker knowing that Bruce must defeat this on his own. Back over at Santa Prisca, Porter and Slaycroft have decided to use young Timothy as their test subject to transform him into the perfect soldier. "You'll give him the pills?" the general asks as he watches Timothy trying to lift weights. But Porter steps up with a syringe in his hand, smiling as he stares at the green liquid inside. "Oh, I've made something better than pills," he says to the general. 15 days pass with Alfred continuing to listen, and Timothy continuing to see the young woman on the island, with Porter and his father finally becoming aware of the relationship. "I think the young woman may be very useful to us," Porter notes as they continue to watch. With that, 20 days pass, and Alfred listens quietly. The serum, meanwhile, over at the island seems to be working. Young Timothy is stronger now, easily lifting 150 pounds over his head. "When do we begin the other part of his training, the surgery?" Slaycroft asks Porter, and Porter smiles. "Hard to say. If all goes well, I'll start the insertations in 2 weeks or so." Slaycroft continues to look at him, both talking as if Timothy isn't even around. "Will he survive?" the general asks, and Porter looks at him. "Does it matter?" Later, Timothy is with his girlfriend, but he seems angrier. His mind is slower. She asks him not to be so rough, but he sneers at her, grabbing her by the arms. But Dr. Porter is suddenly there. "Young Timothy, I hate to interrupt this lovely day, but we have business elsewhere," he says with a big smile. Timothy doesn't argue as he lets the doctor lead him away, and his girlfriend calls out to him, telling him that she doesn't want to see him anymore. "Don't worry, Timothy. You'll see her again. I promise," the doctor says with an evil smile. It is now day 31 and the surgery is successful. Porter removing the bandages from Timothy's body, explaining to the general that the subdermal plates that he is inserting seem to be working. "My son," the general says quietly, looking at what they have transformed Timothy into, and he raises a pistol, opening fire, shooting his son twice. Porter steps forward, making sure that Timothy's skin isn't even broken, and that the young man can no longer even feel pain. "You're lucky, Timothy. You're a lucky Superman," Porter proclaims. And finally, back at the mansion, Alfred stands before the grandfather clock. It is time. He slides the secret door open, staring into the darkness of the cave. "Master Bruce! Batman!" he calls out, his eyes widening as something lurks out of the shadows and Bruce reveals himself. His body is emancipated, his costume in rags, and he stumbles slightly as Alfred looks at his long hair and beard. "I'm all right," Bruce tells him hoarsely and stands back up, stepping out into the house. Alfred offers to make him dinner, but Batman steps to the window, looking out at the world. "Not yet. I want to take a shower first, a long one. Then some toast and hot tea. Then, I think I'll go sit outside in the sun," he says quietly. On the island, Timothy's girlfriend struggles. "I don't want to be with you," she shouts at Timothy, unable to escape his grip, but he gets angry, wrapping his hand around her throat. "Kill her," the general orders, and Timothy doesn't hesitate, slamming her against the wall, allowing her body to slide down, leaving a smear of blood. "Serves her right. She shouldn't have been so standoffish," Slaycroft says as he regards the body. Timothy turns, walking out the door without a word. "Well done. If we can make that weakling of a man into this Superman, we can do it to anyone," Slaycroft says, smiling at Porter. It is later, after a little bit more recovery, Bruce pulls on his costume, and Alfred comments that he is finally starting to fill it out again. "Yes, convalescence is over," he says, and Alfred nods. "A cause for lamination among Gotham's underworld," he says with a smile, but Bruce shakes his head, explaining that he is leaving the city. "I'm going after Porter and Slaycroft," he says as he pulls on his cape, telling Alfred that he can't allow them to go free, that he'll never forget what happened to him in the cave, what he became. "I won't be able to rest until I know that they can't do that to me again." He reaches down, picking up his cowl, putting it on, becoming Batman once more. "Let's get to work." As time passes, as Batman is looking for the answers, General Slaycroft is shouting, "Attack!" His modified soldiers rushing from the woods, attacking the local militiamen of Santa Prisca. One pulls out a pistol, ordering the men to stay back in Spanish. When the weapon goes off, the bullet hitting the man's chest, barely making him flinch. The soldier steps forward, slamming his fists together on either side of the man's head, killing him. The general looks on passively as his soldiers finish up, the entire village now destroyed. Should they burn the huts, do you think? Porter asks, but the general shakes his head. No point. The exercise doesn't require it, he says, turning to his men, ordering them to move out on the double. Later, over at the Santa Prisca mansion, General Slaycroft comes into the den to find Porter taking down some of his own pills. Are you feeling ill, Doctor? He asks, pointing out that Porter has been taking more pills as of late. Are you worried that I'll become an addict? You forget to whom you speak, General. Porter says offhandedly, explaining that he has been taking the drugs for some time to help alleviate his emotional responses after they began their work and he lost his daughter. He stands, offering to make the general his own prescription. I'm living on my own pain, the general tells him simply, and they both step out onto the balcony as Porter asks about the training. Their super soldiers all stand at attention in the courtyard below. I called them to attention 9 hours ago. None of them has moved a muscle since, Slaycroft explains. Porter smiles, telling him that they won't move until they die of starvation. Slaycroft nods, explaining that they are almost ready to return to the United States, to Gotham City, to deal with the scourge that has overtaken America. Meanwhile, Bruce Wayne and Alfred have bought a private jet, and they're using it to fly over the island of Santa Prisca to do some reconnaissance. Far below, General Slaycroft hangs up the phone, thanking his informant in Haiti for the information. And he turns to Porter, explaining that his intel indicates that 2 Americans have purchased a private plane in cash and they have loaded it up with electronics. Should that interest us? Porter asks, taking even more pills, and Slaycroft nods, telling his friend that he believes that the Batman has come for them. It's not him. It can't be. What I did to him with the drugs, he'd be in a rubber room somewhere drooling at this point. Porter explains to the general, but Slaycroft isn't convinced, pulling out a long weapons case. Maybe, but I don't take chances, he says, reaching in, pulling out a rocket launcher with a guidance system. Far overhead, Bruce is looking out of the plane window, taking pictures of the compound below, and his eyes widen as his telescopic lenses sees the general step out onto the balcony with a rocket launcher. He fires that rocket, allowing it to scream through the air. Acting quickly, Alfred and Bruce pull out their parachutes, leaping out into the sky, the explosion overhead pushing them apart, with Bruce beginning to steer towards the opposite end of the island, hoping to lead the general's men away from Alfred's descent. Bruce lands quickly, pulling off his civilian clothes, revealing his Batman costume, and he turns his head sharply to the sound of approaching voices reaching him through the jungle. In moments, he is in the trees, looking down at the militiamen as they approach, and as they reach the tree that he is hiding in, he leaps down, smashing into them silently, taking them out in a matter of minutes. With this done, he moves deeper into the jungle. I'm telling you, it couldn't be him. Porter insists, explaining to the general that the amount of drugs that Batman has taken, he would simply be a wreck, barely able to keep it together. Is it so difficult for you to admit that you failed? The general asks as he reaches into his desk drawer to pull out a service pistol. Holstering the weapon, he heads out onto the balcony, ordering his squad to patrol the compound and not allow anyone in or out. They nod, heading off. We should be safe here, between your zombie squad and Gomez's men. I sure hope so, Porter says as he pulls together his research papers. The phone rings and the general answers, and after a moment of conversation in Spanish, he hangs up, informing Porter that the militiamen have found something. As night has fallen, Batman has made it to the other side of the island, but he finds only the lonely parachute and no Alfred. He pulls himself into the trees, having nothing else to do but wait. And as morning dawns, he hears a helicopter flying overhead, the sound of the general's voice magnified by a megaphone echoing throughout the jungle. You down there, masked man! Wherever you are, look up here! Batman looks up to see Alfred dangling from a rope, and the general continues to shout, telling Batman that they will cut Alfred and put him in the water at the south end of the island, where the sharks feed. He'll be eaten alive unless you rescue him, he says as the chopper buzzes away. In a short amount of time, Batman is stalking across the beach, heading towards the general and Porter. Where is he? Batman demands, and Porter points out into the ocean, where Batman sees Alfred tied to 2 posts. We've nicked his ankles and feet. They've been bleeding into the water for a few minutes now, Porter explains, with the general offering to bargain, but Batman ignores him, removing his cape, stepping into the ocean. When I return, we'll discuss why you did this, he says simply. He begins to swim, passing a small boat with 2 militiamen. He gets to Alfred quickly as the sharks begin to circle him, but Batman grabs the post, twisting it around, kicking the shark hard in the nose. Shark snouts are very sensitive, he tells Alfred as he begins to cut him free, explaining that the shark will return. As Alfred plunges into the water, the 2 look up to see the shark returning, and Batman begins to wrench out one of the posts, ordering Alfred to swim for the shore. He cracks the post, lifting the jagged end out of the water and stabbing it into the mouth of the oncoming shark. Creature falls, its sharp fin cutting across Batman's chest and drawing blood. But it quickly dies and Batman swims away, allowing the other gathering sharks to attack their former brother. He catches up to Alfred quickly, but another shark has broken away and is swimming at them fast. "We'll be able to outswim it. Head for the boat," Batman orders as they draw closer to the militia's men. He swims underneath it, using his strength to tip the boat and send the men into the ocean. "If you have any shark repellent, I suggest you use it," he calls to them as him and Alfred keep swimming. The screams of the militiamen pretty much tell Batman that they don't have that repellent. Batman finally reaches the shore, quickly ordering Alfred to swim back towards the rowboat and try to make contact with the fishermen near Haiti. Slaycroft, Porter, and Timothy wait for them, with Porter smiling, offering Batman a handful of drugs to help him with the exhaustion and the pain. Batman just punches him in the face, standing over his body. A massive hand then cracks him across the jaw, knocking him to his knees, and Timothy stands over Batman. "Private Slaycroft, attention to orders. Execute him." Batman looks up, still weak from the blow and his swim, his blood still leaking out of his own wounds. "Timothy Slaycroft, don't listen to him," Batman says, trying to convince the young man that he doesn't want to do this, that he doesn't have to listen to his father. Timothy isn't listening, taking massive swings at Batman with the Dark Knight barely dodging. Timothy whirls around, finally connecting a blow that knocks Batman to the ground, and he trips the big man's legs as he rushes forward, bringing Timothy to the ground and allowing Batman to get on his back. But Timothy throws Batman off. "What have you done to him?" Batman asks as he turns back to Porter and General Slaycroft. "Trained him and proved him," they say together, and Batman turns back, throwing another blow at Timothy's chest, but nothing happens, and Batman realizes that the young man has some sort of armor underneath his skin. He throws a rapid fire of blows to Tim's neck, stomach, and throat, but the young man doesn't stop coming, grabbing Batman by the throat, lifting him into the air, and beginning to squeeze the life out of him. "Wait, he's worth more as a guinea pig than a corpse," Porter shouts, but there's a moment of hesitation before Slaycroft orders his son to drop the Caped Crusader. "You have something in mind?" the general asks as he removes Batman's utility belt. He then begins to reach for Batman's mask, but Porter stops him. "I'd rather have him remove it. When he does, it will mean that we have him. It will mean that I have won," he says, and he asks the general to order the zombie squad to pick up Batman and turn back towards the house. Later, Batman is awake as Porter shows him the dungeon, explaining that the main door is the only way out and he can only open it by pulling on a certain chain that dangles from the ceiling. "Am I supposed to be impressed?" Batman asks, and Porter points up. "Notice the pipe near the ceiling. Soon water will begin to trickle through it. Within 24 hours, it will fill the entire chamber." He turns back to Batman, smiling, explaining that Batman will drown unless he can open the door by pulling the chain. "Did I also mention the door weighs 800 pounds? He asks and smiles as he walks to the table, putting down a bottle of the strength pills. "Of course you can't open it, can you? Unless you take these. Recognize them?" He tells Batman that if he takes them, he'll be able to open the door easily. "Pills alone won't do it. I'll need weights to build muscle, high-protein food, and some blankets. The cold will sap my strength," Batman explains shortly, and Porter nods and agrees, walking out of the room. "See you in 3 days, you or your corpse," he says with a wave. Meanwhile, out in the ocean, Alfred has finally come in contact with a ship. And back in his cell, Batman quickly gets to work after everything that he was asked for was delivered. He quickly takes the weights and flattens the bar to a point. He turns, looking briefly at the pills on the table, knowing that they would make this task easier. But with his sharpened blade, he begins to scrape away at the mortar from the stones in the wall. He throws aside the bed that they gave him, taking it apart to create a platform and then tear up the blankets to make a rope. Meanwhile, Porter is relaxing. But General Slaycroft finds him, asking him to recreate the notes that he lost in Gotham, the ones that explain how to create the pills. "I don't need notes. I have it all up here," Porter says, tapping his forehead. So of course, later Porter is tied to a chair, and General Slaycroft stands over him with a knife. "I want your notes." But Porter shakes his head. "So you could steal the fruits of my labor?" Slaycroft leans in with the knife. "You will give me what I want." Back in his cell, Batman has created a platform that ties to the chain, and he begins to lift and put the stones onto the platform, slowly raising the steel door to the room, revealing his freedom. Back with Porter, he's crying, blood oozing from dozens of wounds. "No more, please, no more," he whispers as the general holds up a recording device. Back over in the cell, the stones aren't enough, so Batman jumps on the chain, pulling it down just enough to open up the door. The door slides open and he leaps across the room, diving underneath it just before it slams shut again. It's out there that he's greeted by two of Slaycroft's soldiers in the hallway, but he leaps over them quickly, making his way back into the night. In a short amount of time, he sits on a tree outside of General Slaycroft's window, watching as the general is finishing with Porter. "That's everything, General, I swear," the scientist chokes. And with that done, the general picks up his knife, promising Porter that he will test the formula that he was given. And if they're wrong, well, "You will die in agony," he hisses. But the window shatters behind him with Batman leaping into the room. The general tries to attack with his knife, but Batman sidesteps, knocking it away. He then breaks the general's hand as Slaycroft reaches for his pistol, but Batman kicks that away. "You're beaten!" he snaps, and the general turns to Timothy, who seems to be sleeping in the corner. "Attention to orders!" the general begins to shout, but Porter yells for Batman not to let the general say the command phrase. Batman doesn't hesitate, punching the general in the face. He frees the scientist, ordering him to stay put until he clears the mansion. But Porter is already moving, hitting the button on the recorder, making it so that Timothy hears his father's voice. On the recorder, the general had said, "Kill me." And Timothy's eyes open wide and he moves towards the downed General Slaycroft. Batman tries to stop him, but Timothy knocks him away, lifting his father into the air, snapping his neck. With the general dead, the soldiers all seem to snap out of their hypnosis. Timothy cradles his father, tears falling down his eyes. Batman is focused on the young man, not seeing Porter popping his strength pills in the corner. With this done, Batman leaves Porter outside, taking him to a helicopter to return him to Haiti. But it doesn't take them long to return to Gotham City, where the doctor is jailed for his crimes. Later, Batman stands in Lieutenant Gordon's office. Incredibly strong for a frail-looking man, he actually bent one of the cell bars, but it wasn't strong enough to escape. He explains as Batman stares out the window. Gordon continues to read the file, explaining to Batman that Porter went into withdrawal shortly afterwards and died in prison. "Another victory for you. You should be happy," Gordon says as he looks up, but Batman stares out the window, just remembering the young girl that he wasn't strong enough to save that started all of this. And that's the entire story of Batman Venom. I hope you guys enjoyed it.